cash allocation shrunk by 12.3 billion or about 40% from its 2008 level. Now, when Ondoy struck, we immediately brought out a raft of measures containing lifelines which can be thrown to people and places caught by floods. Now, these augmented measures already in place, like the deployment of the 40% of the 2 billion calamity fund to first responder agencies like the Department of Health, the DPWH, DSWD, and the Department of National Defense, which by law must use these allotments as quick response fund. Now, LGUs have also been pre-armed with disaster response funds in the form of an authority allowing them to earmark 5% of their annual budget for relief, reconstruction, rehabilitation, and calamity preparedness. As reports of damage trickled in, government adopted a stance of budget flexibility, as spending grids are not immovable guideposts during tragedies. As we say in the DBM, when your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't withhold the use of water earmarked for the washing of the car. Now, this is the reason why even before the flood in Cainta receded, we already had approved the request of the DPWH for an additional 200 million for the repair of roads and the request of the Department of Health for an additional 700 million for the repair of damaged hospitals. Now, in cobbling together funds for disaster relief for the current fiscal year, the hierarchy of resource mobilization should be first, the funds designated for calamity relief or activities which fall within the mandate of the agencies. Second is the augmentation of these funds. That's why we always do the performance review of each department on a quarterly basis, so we can see if there are funds which can be reallocated to other needing expenditure items. And third, the supplemental budget, which we heard will be passed this evening. Now, the 12 billion supplemental budget, which will address the tactical needs for the last 75 days of the year. Now, for 2010, the focus will be to shift to the repair and rehabilitation and asset replacements to take advantage of the good weather window summer brings. Now, to fund reconstruction, and taking the cue from the President, to fund reconstruction, we take the position that the capital outlays configuration in the proposed 2010 budget be no longer disturbed, as this will trigger complaints from heirs to be dispossessed of these projects. Instead, we will seek from Congress an increase by 50 billion in the program funds for the 2010 national budget. It will be tapped if new revenues can be found, or through loans and other fruits of our humanitarian diplomacy will bring the pipeline. These funds will be disbursed in the most transparent manner possible. The menu of programs and projects will be line itemized, and in addition, a jobs benchmark will be attached to each of the projects. Construction will mobilize the local sector to include work for food schemes so victims themselves can earn while the roads they use and the schools their children go to are being rebuilt. Public work construction on the post-Ondoy era will have to take into consideration the effects of climate change and respect the environment, for we cannot undertake a revolving door construction activities in areas prone to floods, where taxpayers' money will just go down the drain. Now, in closing, the proposed 2010 budget is a responsible budget for three major reasons. The first, it is committed to fiscal consolidation so as not to burden future generations. It restricts and the increase in government debt. Second, it is committed to disciplined spending by completing programs and projects started by this administration and by shifting spending to high-priority programs. Third, it will begin the reconstruction of damaged areas by bringing relief to victims, rebuilding their communities, and reviving their local economies. And of course, in closing, in this highly charged electoral season, we always hear the static that this amount, or our budget of 1.54, is always not enough. A familiar refrain I hear, which we all hear, always hear, and I heard from one aspirant that his call would be that for the budget that health should have 5% of GDP, education another 5% of GDP, agriculture another 5% of GDP, Defense, another 5% of GDP. Environment and climate change, another 5% of GDP. Local governments, 5% of GDP. So I added this all up, it came up to 30% of GDP. The implication, ladies and gentlemen, of course, is obvious, which is a tax effort of 30%, which means 30% of the value of every grain of rice, every text message sent, every liter of gasoline bought will now be captured in taxes. But asked if we would allow an effective national tax rate of 30% to be enabled to address his call, the proponent, of course, only balked at the conclusion and even had the guts to call for more tax breaks. Ladies and gentlemen, we oftentimes forget that budgeting is merely the downstream of revenue collection. The fine print in the General Appropriations Act can only be implemented if revenues are found to breathe life into them. Without taxes, the budget is a dead-letter law. Candidates will issue promises whose cost, if quantified, will cost billions. 5 applicants for the highest paid casual job in government, which will be vacated June 30, will collectively issue trillions of pesos worth of promises. But while they may be quick to draw in dishing out promises, they will be slow in saying how their programs will be financed. Now, because you are one of the 50 million employers who will choose this person who will lead our government for the next 6 years, maybe it's time in making your choice. You pick the one who will know how to finance the programs he will pursue, because that would spell the difference between rhetoric and reality. Thank you, and since this is my last economic briefing, goodbye.
Good morning. The last statement of Secretary Nono.